Sometimes one scene changes the way you feel about an entire show, like tipping the first domino after hours of setup. Cascading effects can be really cool. I think one of my favorite parts of strong writing is when small moments recontextualize old scenes and influence new ones. There are two really strong examples of this that I've been sitting on for a while, but recently I realized I can place them side by side and it might actually make for a much better product. So once again, I'll be comparing Apothecary Diaries and My Dress Up Darling, albeit this time a little bit more focused on praise. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about when a couple minutes changes an entire show. So a really important part of understanding this argument is looking at tone. I think it's a drastically undervalued part of storytelling. Tonal complexity can make a show, and tonal dissonance can break one. We'll be diving deeper into tone later on after I've given the examples, but first we should define what tone is and differentiate it from mood. This article puts it nicely. Tone in storytelling refers to the emotional quality and attitude conveyed by the author through the choice of words, style, and perspective. The tone can create a mood that affects how readers perceive characters, events, and the overall narrative. Tone is presentation, and mood refers to the individual experience. A good example of the difference between the two is how fast food commercials try to make their burgers as appealing as possible. That's the tone. Whereas any individual who doesn't eat meat or doesn't like beef at all might not find it appealing. That's the mood. So today we're talking about scenes that demonstrate tonal complexity in a way that really enhances a story. Let's start first with Apothecary Diaries. I think two of my favorite parts of this show are its protagonist and setting. Mao Mao is outstanding and a fantastic catalyst for conflict in the story, and the setting feels fresh, interesting, unique, and immersive. It takes place in an alternative timeline, ancient China, in the Rear Palace, where the emperor's concubines are surrounded by only women and eunuchs. This story initially has this kind of detective feel, with Mao Mao being highly educated and capable. It's a light-hearted character drama with hints of heavier themes. It's not bogged down by its darker moments, but it also doesn't ignore them. Take, for example, the start of the story. It begins with Mao Mao being kidnapped and taken to the Rear Palace with no choice or agency in the matter. If you think about it, it's very heavy and initially brushed over with a more light-hearted tone. But the story doesn't leave it there forever. They come back later and explain why Mao Mao responded this way, in a way that I think makes tons of sense. A major theme in this story is that this is a society with a huge inequality in power, and Mao Mao as a character accepts the reality of the situation and does the best with what she's given. But the story is able to maintain its fun nature because of her extreme capability. It gives her tons of agency and influence, and her function as a pseudo-detective lets her be removed from the more intense conflict, but not forever. As the story progresses, Mao Mao finds herself more and more involved in heavy circumstance. People intertwined in complex political schemes are dying, and Mao Mao's curiosity and capability constantly leads to her unearthing these complex situations. She understands that she's being pulled more and more towards these risky political schemes where a single mistake could lead to execution. Her character is deeply focused on self-preservation, but also aware of the limits of what she can say no to due to the setting. This is where the scene that changed Apothecary Diaries for me came in. In Season 1, Episode 9, Mao Mao is having a conversation with Jinshi, a powerful eunuch in the Rear Palace. They're discussing the body of a lady-in-waiting who was found drowned in the moat surrounding the Rear Palace, debating based off of evidence whether or not it was suicide or murder. Mao Mao is a passionate character, obsessed with medicine and poison, to the point where her left forearm is riddled with scars from all the experiments she's done on herself. Her curiosity is a central component of what drives her, which is fun because in the story there are tons of little parallels between her and the personality of a cat. But pulling back to this scene, it's delivered in an incredibly unique way. Color design is used in Apothecary Diaries very deliberately. This scene has a deep orange from the setting sun. Where there would usually be a range of different beautiful colors, this scene becomes a homogeneous, warm tone. It really is a step away from what the show is used to, and what makes the scene so special is how the fantastic execution supports that change. The music's another standout component, because the story really explores in this moment the magnitude of its writing decisions. Mao Mao considers all the death surrounding her, the political intrigue, and the way pawns are thrown to the wayside. And Mao Mao makes a request. If Jinshi's forced to give the execution order, she asks for him to make it poison. And this blunt realism really hits in the context of the story so far. It helps avoid that common storytelling pitfall that's especially prevalent in anime of introducing all these high stakes but avoiding the consequences of them. And it's all supported by this really fantastic montage where things slow down and just showcases what's happened. It's a huge tonal shift that really works, feeling like a proper acknowledgement to all the little components that have built the story. Apothecary Diaries would be a much weaker show if it wasn't able to get serious. This, in conjunction with its lighthearted tone, makes for a story that's both easy to watch but also very emotionally impactful. I generally want stories that push me to think about stuff or feel some strong emotions, to be transported into another perspective to help understand the way humanity works a little bit better. And it's all built around this cohesive tone that continues to expand and adapt. And this isn't the only time it happens in Apothecary Diary. Actually, when I think of some of my favorite moments from the entire series so far, I think they'd kind of fall into this category. But this is the first scene that stuck out to me that I kept coming back to, one that represents a larger recurring decision within the story: to be ambitious with its tone, maintaining a difficult balance between fun and serious. The second scene we're going to be talking about is from a show called My Dress-Up Darling. From the outside perspective looking in, it would be easy to reduce this show to just a fan service story. Anime in many ways is infamous for its shoehorned fan service, and it's not rare for entire shows to be built around the sexualization of characters. A lot of the things I really love about this show not only don't feed into the fan service, but also actively work in opposition to what you would associate with a fan service-y show. Fanservice can often feel objectifying and reductive, but Marin, the main character, feels deeply cared for and humanized by the writing. Fanservice often feels voyeuristic and invasive, but in My Dress-Up Darling it's the result of agency, passion, and personality. Fanservice often feels indulgent, like it's feeding into individuals' fantasy, often in unhealthy ways. But I think My Dress-Up Darling uses fanservice for aesthetic and function, consistently serving characters' conflict or the plot. There are better and worse scenes in this show involving fanservice. Some I think are crucial parts of the story, and others I could have done without. But what makes me feel confident in this story is the context around those scenes. Moments so strong that they provide a larger benefit of the doubt for the story. This was a show that I was never sure I was going to make a video on, but then I found something to talk about, and I guess I was surprised at how many people in the comments section echoed the same experience I had with this show. Because ultimately, despite all the fan service, I think it feels above anything else wholesome. And I think that's represented best in its beach scene. Now, I've already talked a little bit about this scene in the past. I mentioned how subversive it is that the beach moment in My Dress-Up Darling is the opposite of what you would expect, having almost no fan service, and focusing deeply on the characters and their relationship, their budding emotions. Anime often tries to emulate practical cinematography, and I almost want to say the way this scene was shot is fantastic, because it feels very real. It literally emulates tons of practical directing and cinematography decisions, using a range of different focal lengths that aren't just wide angle, with these flat backgrounds and blown out bokeh, utilizing an upward angle when Marin's looking at Gojo and a downward angle when Gojo's looking at Marin. There are tons of little decisions that showcase just how beautifully this scene was directed. That's also expressed in its animation, how long it pauses between cuts, the way they left tons of space. But all of this is supporting what I think is its best component, the writing, specifically in conjunction with the show's tone, where there's this beautiful budding relationship that's so mutually beneficial, where Marin and Gojo are pushing each other, sharing appreciation and experiencing special moments that come with going and doing stuff, trying to exist a little bit more. Occasionally stories capture this feeling that I've experienced a lot in life, where there's tons of significance, but it feels kind of nebulous. Because once again, just like Apothecary Diaries, My Dress-Up Darling is primarily a show that's fun, but occasionally they add really significant layers to the story through remarkably executed tonal complexity. There's this common literary structure called the 5 elements of storytelling: character, setting, plot, conflict, and theme. But one of my brothers, who's a high school English teacher, when teaching storytelling elements, adds a 6th: tone. I think it's one of the most identifiable parts of most people's favorite stories. That article I pointed out earlier when defining what tone was is called Examples of Tone in Story: Developing Your Narrative Voice. And I specifically like that last part, a narrative voice, because tone touches on a very important part of storytelling, the presentation of a story's emotional landscape. Because when a story pulls off a complex, layered tone well, I think it makes for something really special. I love when a story allows you to come up for air after a heavy moment with a well-placed joke, or when it gets really deep when you would least expect it. And in some odd cases, that depth goes above and beyond, influencing the way you feel about an entire show. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next week.